You're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's dedicated rewatch of Star Trek, all 729 hours of it, here celebrating the 50th anniversary. I'm one of the hosts this week, Matthew Rushing, and with me is my good friend, John Mills.
Hello, Matt. Hello, everybody. Yes, that's right. We're back. We're back again on From There to Here to shepherd you through a delightful little block of Deep Space Nine and Voyager episodes.
Back in the saddle again.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Our first episode this week, John, is Flashback from Voyager, and this is the 30th anniversary episode that Voyager did to celebrate Star Trek turning 30. Mm-hmm. This is also the same year that we had Trials and Tribulations celebrating 30 years of Star Trek. So both shows almost competing in some way to try and see, well, who can celebrate better. And, well, what did Voyager come up with, John?
Voyager came up with an interesting premise where Tuvok starts remembering some things that he hasn't remembered before. And eventually it all leads into a tremendous amount of fan service where we get to revisit the Excelsior with George Takei appearing as Captain Sulu during the events of Star Trek VI, a very beloved film in the series, and they figured was a very clever way to tie everything together and act as its own sort of bridge episode between the generations.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, we got some other great cast members back from the film. You had Grace Lee Whitney that was back, which was fantastic. You had Boris, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his last name because it would just not do well. You had Jeremy Roberts back as Dimitri Valentine, which was fantastic. So, I mean, they really were bringing back some characters from the film to really try and make this feel like you were back on the Excelsior in this time period, which, when you say that, I mean, this is my favorite Star Trek film that they're referencing. So I should love this, right, John?
In theory, I'm absolutely sure that's what the meeting sounded like, where they said, hey, I know what we can do to make everybody love it. And I'll tell you what, as everybody knows, we all have our favorites and our not favorites in the Star Trek series. And this was an episode where when I heard what was coming down the pike, I said, that's definitely an episode of Voyager I'm going to watch. I'm definitely tuning in for that one.
And it was interesting because, before you kind of know what's happening in the episode, I think it is kind of an interesting mystery. Why is Tuvok remembering this time period? And what's great about it is, it's funny. We were talking to John Jackson Miller on Literary Treks, and one of the great things about Star Trek is you have characters who live beyond their series. Spock lived beyond his series. Tuvok is obviously somebody who lives between the time periods. He's in the original series time period as a young lieutenant at this point, and then of course all the way through to Voyager, being on that show and in that time period. So I think it's pretty fascinating what we get here, that idea. But I think that it's frustrating because the execution and actually why it's happening really, I would say, falls apart.
I would agree with you. It's not as compelling as you want it to be through the episode. The hook that they have is intriguing, but it's done in such a way where, space memory virus is infecting Tuvok. And it's just, that's what you had to go with. You couldn't go with something else. And of course, they use it as the tie-in because it passes from person to person and, through, specific means and everything. But it's just, it just falls flat. And it's also home to an absolutely wonderful, gigantic continuity error. If you have watched Star Trek VI on anything that's not pan and scan, which of course is common now, but people would have still been watching full frame on their televisions, because at the time that Star Trek VI came out, with video cassettes and televisions, we didn't really have the widescreen revolution that we had in recent years. And that is a crew member in Tuvok's memory, whatever, that dies on the Excelsior is in the final shot of Star Trek VI. It's just that he's on screen left, so you don't see him on the regular 4x3 TV, but when you see the full shot, he's there. And it's a boo-boo, and they didn't need to make it, and it's disappointing.
It is disappointing, and I think the other thing that's disappointing to me is the way in which it treats Star Trek VI and having Sulu and his crew try and rescue Kirk and Spock. It just doesn't really seem to fit the storyline that we did get in Star Trek VI. It just really, to me, it doesn't work. So all around, I feel like they're trying really hard to do something cool to celebrate Star Trek in its 30th anniversary. But honestly, I just kind of feel like they're trying too hard.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. So there you go. That's Flashback for you.
Well, John, our next episode is The Chute, and that's another Voyager episode. We're sticking with Voyager here, and I'm going to come out right on the gate, right here, and say I think this is one of Voyager's best episodes.
Really? One of the best? Okay.
Yes.
What makes it one of the best for you?
Well, for me, what really works about this episode is the episode opens with Harry being shoved down a chute and lands up in a prison and getting beat up, and Tom saves him, and it turns out that they have both been accused of a crime on a planet that they were visiting. And what I love about this is this whole idea of, Voyager running into these races that they don't really know so much about, obviously, and trying to get to know them so that they can, create trade and all of that. And things like this, misunderstandings like this happening. And what I loved about this was the darkness and the grittiness of the storyline, and really where they took these characters. I mean, there is a scene near the end where, not only are they in this prison that they can't get out of, but there is a device that's been put in their heads that constantly kind of feeds their nervous system to make them jumping, to make them agitated. And this continues to eat at them. And watching Starfleet characters slowly degrade into kind of a more animalistic nature, I thought was really fascinating. It's kind of thing that you might have thought you would see on Deep Space Nine, and I really liked watching Harry almost kill Tom Paris and have to stop himself because he's slowly being driven insane by this clamp on his head, is what they call it, and from being in this place where you're just trying to survive. So to me, except until the very end where they pretty much hit the reset button, it's a really great episode.
I don't know that I can really add anything to that except to sort of say, in support of your point, like an episode this, for lack of a better term, dark. This is darker than I think Voyager got most of the time. It felt like they didn't play it as safe as they usually did, and I think that I think you're right. It does pay off. Is it one of the best? I definitely think you make a good argument for it. But I do think that Star Trek, when it pushes itself, can produce some really fantastic television, and you get good episodes. And this is obviously one of them. Well,
and what I think that also, when they got back to the ship, you can tell that Harry Kim is, and the way that it's being acted, I have to say, the way in which Garrett Wang is playing his remorse of what he's almost done is just fantastic. I mean, he is so distraught over what he's almost done, and you can tell it's affected his psyche. He doesn't have that bounce in his step, like, oh, we've just got rescued. You can tell this guy's going to need counseling, and then they just kind of gloss over it by Tom saying, you know what I remember? Someone saying, this man is my friend, and nobody touches him. And I'll remember that for a long time. And then everything's hunky-dory, and they go off to dinner. But what I would have loved to see is this continue, the repercussions of this on Tom and Harry. I mean, I would think that you would need some serious therapy after this, honestly.
Yeah, but I mean, we're still navigating a time period in television where episodic meant episodic. That you did hit the reset button at the end of the hour, typically.
Well, and I would say that if Deep Space Nine didn't exist. So.
Now, okay. Yes, that. You know, I think that gets at the core. Maybe this episode, the way it resolves itself, is illustrative of a key difference between the two series, and why some people react so strongly in a positive way to Deep Space Nine. Is there was more of a feeling of the stories being impactful long-term as opposed to being just story of the week. And I'm not taking a dig at Voyager. I'm agreeing with you. This is a good episode. But I think that maybe you're onto something there, that Deep Space Nine was less episodic in its outlook. But this is talking about this episode of Voyager. We pronounce, so I'd say they're batting 500 in these two episodes, yeah?
I completely agree. I think so. I think we went from one of the most met episodes of Voyager to, honestly, I think one of the best.
Cool. So where can people find you online if they want to argue with you about it?
Well, they can find me on Twitter at MattRushing02. They can also find me here on the network doing The Orb, where I talk with Chris Jones about Deep Space Nine exclusively. And then I'm doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show here on the network. So much fun talking about all of our favorite fandoms outside of Star Trek, so please join us there. And I'm on this little show on a network called The Nerd Party, and, well, John, I think you might know it. It's called Aggressive Negotiations, and I have a wildly funny co-host there where we talk about Star Wars. And, well, he's frequently wrong, but I put up with him anyway.
That's a generous way to put that, Matthew. That's really, really generous. I appreciate that. What's funny is I too am on a show called Aggressive Negotiations on the Nerd Party Network, and I have a bearded co-host, and he's wrong about 50% of the time. So it's funny how that works out. But I am also here on the network. Come on, y'all should know this by now. On Stage 9, which I co-host with Mike Schindler, where we continue the fine tradition of exploring the non-Trek work of Trek creators. We've been having a great time with it, so come on over and give a listen. And I'm over on Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And go on your social network of choice, find Kessel Junkie, and that's going to be me. And tune in next time when we take a look at 2 more episodes here on From There to Here, where we will be looking at
The Swarm and Apocalypse Rising.